1 week season.
What is going on, OWS fam, DFS fam? Welcome back to the DFS Lab. I am your host, JM to Win from oneweekseason.com, here with my man KTM128, Keegan. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I don't know how to feel about this week, though.
No, this week is a strange one. It's going to keep getting stranger. I pushed back. We send out the Angles email on Thursday mornings most weeks where I kind of break down the macro view of the slate. And which, by the way, if you're watching this, you don't get the Angles email. It's available to OWS free members as well. So go to 1 week season, sign up for OWS free. But this week I pushed it back to Friday because it was like, let's just wait for a little bit more news to come out. Before we move on to week 18, though, a little post-mortem, week 17. No Mike Evans on your end is what you reported to me.
Yeah, I mean, I had him in one lineup all because I texted you and you said that I'd put Mike Evans and somebody else in there. I was like, you know what? I'll do that for one lineup.
It was one of those things. I was thinking about it yesterday when I was working through it on the Inner Circle podcast of like, because I didn't play last week, and it was like, would I have pulled the trigger on Mike Evans myself? I think I would have on one of 7 smaller field rosters. Like if I'd built 6 or 7 smaller field rosters. But I kind of laid out the reasons of like, there's every once in a while you're looking through ownership projections, and there's a guy at like 2% owned or 1% owned that is just like, yeah, but this guy's going to hit way more often than people realize. I think what I said to you was like a 30-point to 35-point game. But I didn't see a 50 burger coming. Did we talk? So I have a question. Did we talk about him on the show last Saturday? Because I feel like we did.
Yeah,
okay.
We did.
Okay. So yeah, I looked through I done my ownership projections notes Saturday morning, and that was when I put a note in there. That's for Inner Circle members. I put a note in there on our cheat sheet ownership projections. It was like, this guy hits way more often than people are giving him credit for. And then we talked about him on the show. But yeah, tough guy to pull the trigger on. Still, though, you had a Brady and Godwin roster, which is a pretty sick roster for last weekend.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I mean, I had made a joke about it on here last week, saying that like he has a new girlfriend.
Yeah. Turns out makes a difference. Man, that's a scary team too. And it's one of those teams. I was talking to my dad about this over the weekend. It's like one of those teams you probably don't actually want to play them in the playoffs. Granted, like the Eagles, the 49ers, the Cowboys are a step ahead, like they're a tier ahead of the Bucks and the Giants, whoever else is coming out of that conference. But that's still a scary team to be playing. And interesting, actually, that's an interesting kickoff point for this one because the Bucks are 4-point underdogs this week against the Falcons, which means that sports books are treating it like the Bucks are going to rest players. The Bucks can't fall below the 4 seed. They can't move above the 4 seed. Interestingly, though, in 2020, they were in a similar situation. They couldn't move above the 5 seed, and they were highly unlikely to fall below the 5 seed. Brady played the full game. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, everybody played the full game. Brady threw like 40-plus pass attempts in that game. So that's one of those really weird, interesting ones where it's like, who's the random team that people are just sort of expecting them to not play their starters, but they actually could play? Todd Bowles has already said that they're going to play starters, but I think the assumption is that it's a situation similar to what we saw with Jacksonville last week, where similar to what we talked about, what we forecasted, Travis Etienne was done by halftime. Trevor Lawrence played 1 or 2 series in the second half and then was done. So people are kind of expecting it to be something like that for the Bucks, but would be very interesting if that's not the case. Anything standing out to you before we dive into roster builds? Anything standing out to you? Because I have a list of like 3 quarterbacks right now, like all cheap running backs, but it's a really strange week.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought about playing Tom this week, but I kind of like that. I mean, I might put him on a lineup or 2. It's really odd. Justin Fields, they said he was out this week, not out because of like injury or anything, right? Just because of a lot of people are probably going to be out just due to the playoffs. What do you think about that? Like, who else is going to be out that you know?
Yeah, so Carson Wentz is benched. Sam Howell is going to be starting for Washington. Justin Fields, I mean, he's super banged up, so it's a situation where they're like, let's go ahead and just get this guy some rest head into next season. Sam Ellinger is going to be starting for the Colts this week. there are a few other spots. So yeah, and I worked through this on the podcast. Anybody, if you're watching this and you're an Inner Circle member, you've probably already listened to the podcast. If you're not, we have knocked the price of rest of season Inner Circle to 90% off. So that means this week and then throughout the playoffs, it's basically $22 for week 18 and all the playoffs for Inner Circle. But I worked through like kind of in depth on game by game in the Inner Circle podcast yesterday. And one of the things I worked through was, let me see if I still have these numbers pulled up. Yeah. So we think about, I don't want to go too in depth because I don't want to give away everything we talked about in this Inner Circle pod, but we think about week 18 being a week where I'll put it into three categories. Like there's teams that have nothing to play for because they're in the playoffs and their seeding can't really change, right? And they might be resting some key guys. Then there's teams that have everything to play for because they're still fighting for a potential playoff spot. And then there's teams that have nothing to play for because their season's over. And a lot of those teams, their season's been over for several weeks. So we don't tend to see like the teams that their season's over because it's been over for several weeks making huge changes. But a lot of times we do see some minor changes in week 18. And what we often think about in DFS is everybody thinks about like, who's the young guy who might get featured this week, right? Like who's the guy that's been sitting on the bench as the second stringer, rookie, whatever, that they might feature in week 18. But this is the big games from last year's week 18, okay? Russell Gage had a big game, veteran player. Dearness Johnson had a big game, veteran backup for the Browns. Nick Chubb was actually active, had 9 carries. Dearness Johnson had 25 carries for the Browns in week 18 last year. Khalif Raymond had a big game, another veteran player. Alan Lazard had a big game. It was a game where the Packers had nothing to play for. They rested Aaron Rodgers halfway through the game, rested Devontae Adams partway through the game, but Alan Lazard still kept playing. Danny Amendola, who's now retired and was like 36 and hadn't played for several weeks, he had 7 catches for 113 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 18 last year. Another super veteran player, Marvin Jones last year, 7 catches for 88 yards and a touchdown. Duke Johnson, now out of the NFL, 25 carries for 117 yards and a touchdown. Darnell Mooney, young guy, but still like had a big role and was kind of ascending, had a big game in week 18. There was only one sort of random out of nowhere non-veteran player, and it was Amir Smith-Marset for the Vikings with Adam Thielen out, and he had 3 catches for 103 yards and a touchdown. So we think of like the Amir Smith-Marsets, right? We think of like, who's the guy that nobody even knows their name and they're going to come out of nowhere and have a big game. But a lot of times it's these veteran guys that it's kind of like, whether it's like, oh, hey, we're resting Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, but Alan Lazard's still playing the whole game. Or it's like a Russell Gage, Dearness Johnson, Danny Amendola, Marvin Jones. It's the guys it's like they've worked hard all season. They're a veteran player, and they kind of just give them a chance to shine in this week 18 game. So I think that that's one of the small edges, because really like week 18, if you're playing anything larger than 1,000 entry contests, you have to be trying to find like, who's the random guy who's going to have a big game, who's going to have like a separator score, right? But we, again, like most people are going to be looking for like the kind of unknown young players. And sometimes it's these like non-sexy Marvin Jones, Danny Amendola type guys who have these big games. So I think that's one of the interesting things to think about. And then, yeah, like my quarterback list is Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow. And then it's like maybe Mike White, maybe Deshaun Watson, maybe Russell Wilson, maybe Tom Brady. But it's like Allen needs to win this game to still get the number 1 seed. Burrow needs to win this game to lock up the AFC North. Jalen Hurts needs to win this game to lock up the 1 seed, assuming he's playing. And so you have like 3 elite quarterbacks who absolutely have to win these games. And then a ton of quarterbacks with kind of uncertain like snap share, right? Like, is Tom Brady going to play the full game, or how's this team going to approach this game? And then like a lot of backups playing this week. And so, yeah, it's one of these weeks where I don't want to get too like the random backup starting probably isn't going to have a monster game, right? And so I don't want to get too crazy, but yeah, there are spots that I want to look to and be like, where can I maybe find the guy who people aren't thinking of that can pop off?
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So all that being said, I feel like we're going to find the most value this week, maybe at wide receiver. I mean, obviously we can get for some cheaper running backs just because a lot of the, top ones are going to be seated like we've been saying, but, or they could be potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested. Let's look at running back first, because my running back list is like right now, not my full list, like for my show with Joe Holka that I do every other week, I send him like 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers. The three running backs I sent him this week were Zack Moss, Najee Harris, and Miles Sanders, who are all under 6. I think maybe Najee's like 6,200,
I love
6,200.
Najee, yeah.
Like they're all cheap guys, because if we go up to the top, Christian McCaffrey should have everything to play for, because if Minnesota wins in the early slate, San Francisco needs to win in the late to lock up the number 2 seed. But they're also playing Arizona, and Arizona's down to David Blau at quarterback. David Blau was on the practice squad for the Lions earlier this season. And so he's not like a real NFL starter, right? So there's a chance that San Francisco handles Arizona early and they're able to get Christian McCaffrey some rest. That's the only concern there. Austin Eckler's last 8 games, he's topped 16 touches only 3 times. So 13, 21, 16, 15, 23, 14, 22, 14. That's his last 8 games. And it's unlikely that the Chargers fall below the 5 seed. And even if they do, they end up with the 6 seed. So I'd be surprised. Now, last week he had like a monster game on 14 touches. So he can do that. But like, do we really? And Travis Etienne did that last week as well, right? He got rested at halftime. He had like 12, 13 touches and had a monster game. Like, maybe he can do that, but I don't want to like spend 8,900 hoping for a monster game on 14 touches. Right. And then like Saquon, the Giants have nothing to play for, so he's at high risk of sitting, and he rarely posts blow-up games. Nick Chubb, that's potential, but again, like 3 games in his career north of 33 points, none since 2019. Last year, they gave Dearness Johnson a bunch of touches in week 18. So yeah, like I could see saving salary at running back, because we do have like Justin Jefferson's in a must-win game. The Vikings, if they win it in the early slate and then the 49ers lose late, Vikings can get the 2 seed, which means a home playoff game in the second round, potentially a home playoff game in the championship game. Jamar Chase is in a game that they need to win. A.J. Brown's in a game that they need to win. Devontae Smith, T. Higgins. So like there are some high-priced wide receivers that I kind of want to free up some salary for myself, just because it's like, and we might be able to do it, right, and get like the cheaper running backs too. But like these guys like Zack Moss and Najee Harris and like the Steelers can make the playoffs if they win this game and get a little bit of help. And they're playing the Browns, who everybody runs the ball against. The Browns are not being aggressive with Deshaun Watson. He had 18 pass attempts last week. So like Najee should get 20 touches, 18 to 22 touches in this one. Miles Sanders is only 5,900. We know he can put up 30-pointers. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to like box us into those specific guys, but I do think that it's a week where the high-priced guys are kind of thin at running back this week.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Najee has been someone that I've been looking at a lot this week, where there's like really not a lot to pick. So
yeah, and usually he's the kind of guy who, are like at 6,100, you're like, well, he can't get me a 30-pointer. But then if all the expensive guys get you 20 points, then like an 18 to 22-pointer from Najee becomes pretty valuable. Yeah, and then Zack Moss is just kind of the bell cow right now for the Colts, who don't have a quarterback and are highly likely to just be running the ball in this one. So no monster games yet, right? But when we look at his touches, he's the kind of guy who we can come out of a week like this and then be like, oh man, how did I not think about it? Now he hasn't been getting receptions, but they're not going to be passing the ball much either. So we're still talking yardage and touchdown back. He's pretty thin, but everything's kind of thin at running back in my mind. So with that, where do you want to start this roster? Do you want to start it at quarterback? Do you want to start it at running back? I mean, Kenneth Walker is interesting, right? They need this win because they can still make the playoffs if the Packers lose at night. If they win and the Packers lose at night, not the best matchup, but Kenneth Walker has like way higher ceiling than some of these other guys that we're going to be looking at in this range. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind going mid-range at running back, and then we could always change things up if we need to.
Yeah, I love that. Let's start out with Najee, just because I feel very comfortable picking him this week. Yeah,
and running back's kind of the spot where it's the best place to pick the guys you feel comfortable with, because it's like the highest, most projectable position.
Right. Exactly.
And then like getting uncomfortable at some of the other positions is the better way to go sometimes.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, we're talking about JJ at the top, for that 9-1 salary right there. What do you think the odds are that he doesn't go off? So Chicago is going to be uncompetitive, right? More than likely, with Nathan Peterman starting. The Bears have a really bad run defense, and the Vikings, if they put them away early, maybe they kind of take their foot off the gas.
but their offense is pass centric. So I wouldn't be concerned through like the first 3 quarters. I would think that Justin Jefferson still gets double-digit targets. He still has an outside shot at breaking Calvin Johnson's record for, I think it's 1,983 yards. In fact, let me look that up real quickly. The record is, thanks Google for not pulling it up right away. But yeah, I think it's 1,964 yards. So Justin Jefferson is kind of in striking distance, right? He has several 200-yard games. He gets a 200-yard game here. He's got a shot at that record. He said, he talked before the season about his desire to go for 2,000 yards, and he was on pace for that until the absolute dud last week against the Packers. Another spot that we kind of forecasted on the show. But a 200-yard game here gets him the record for most receiving yards of the season. I don't know that they're going to like go out of their way to try to get that, but I think that in this spot, they're going to run their typical offense. They're coming off of a really ugly, embarrassing loss, and they're heading into the playoffs. They still need to win this game. So I think that this is a game where they kind of try to get the offense rolling again, get a lot of confidence pumped back into this offense before they head into the playoffs, right? So I do think that double-digit targets is kind of a lock for Jefferson in this spot. Maybe not a lock, but as much of a lock as you can have in the NFL. Yeah. And I feel pretty comfortable with his upside here.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I love that. And then on to pair that with JJ, I feel like Kirk Cousins has kind of been on fire lately. Besides that dud from last week, he really has been going off. Past like 3 games before that, 24, 37, 28.
So one of the things I would look at with Cousins is the context of his big games, right? The 24-pointer in a 3-point win over the Giants, the 37-pointer in that big comeback against Indy, the 28-pointer chasing points against the Lions, an 11-point loss, the 22-pointer against the Patriots in a back-and-forth game on Thanksgiving. So I would have concerns about his ceiling and I say this to say, like, let's throw him on this roster, but then when we throw him on, we think about how much needs to go right for him, and then how much more risk do we want to take on in other spots, if that makes sense. So like once I put a Cousins on, I want to say what needs to happen for Cousins to have a big game, right? Like I might end up playing Khalil Herbert on a Cousins roster and say, hey, maybe Khalil Herbert breaks off some long runs and scores some touchdowns for the Bears, or maybe Cole Kmet scores multiple touchdowns, something like that, because you'd like the game to stay a little bit closer to maximize the chances of Kirk Cousins having a good game.
Yeah, so basically it has to be like a competitive game for.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like the Bears can win it, right? But it needs to be something where the Vikings feel compelled deep into the game to kind of keep passing. And Khalil Herbert he's 4,600, but he fits this veteran who might get some extra work type of category, right? Where obviously you're taking a big swing here, but if you're talking larger field contest, who's the random guy who might have a bunch of carries? Like earlier in the year with David Montgomery playing 12 carries, 16 carries, 10 carries. And we know that he can break off these long runs. So I don't know if you want to go in that direction or somewhere else, but Chase Claypool is another one, right? Where we all think about Nathan Peterman being an awful quarterback. You weren't playing DFS at the time, but his first start, he had 5 interceptions by like halftime, and then got benched after that. So he's kind of been a joke for a long time. John Gruden was kind of a joke when he was coaching the Raiders, and John Gruden really liked Nathan Peterman, so that amplified the joke further. So everybody just thinks of Nathan Peterman as this awful quarterback, but realistically, he could come out and feed Chase. If he doesn't, he's not going to be running the ball, right? They have to run a different offense with a pocket passer. So Chase Claypool had 0 points last week. Nobody's going to play him. He's the kind of guy who maybe with a pocket passer, he ends up getting 8 or 9 targets. Chase Claypool has multiple 30-point scores in his career. He has a 50-pointer at some point in his career. I mean, he's a big talent in terms of when he gets the work. It just hasn't been. Last year he had Ben Roethlisberger with a dead arm who couldn't get the downfield passes to him. And then this year he just hasn't had a good season, right? But let's go back to 2020. His rookie year, he had a 45-pointer. He had a 21-pointer and a 24-pointer. So those are his best games, but he has a 45-pointer on his ledger. Not that we would expect that from Nathan Peterman, but just to say he can post a big game, and he's like a monster talent if they can get him going. So again, this is all if we're playing Kirk Cousins. If we decide to not play Kirk Cousins, then we don't necessarily need a Bears piece. But that's how I would think about the Kirk Cousins play, is what can kind of push the Vikings to stay aggressive with Cousins deep into the game.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a really important mindset to think about when playing a quarterback that is very dependent upon the game, the type of game that's going on, and how that scripts out. So that all that being said, I do kind of want to see where we can go with salary before we pick this quarterback.
Okay,
I
yeah.
have an idea of what I want to do if we don't pick Kirk Cousins here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so where do we want to go next then to kind of get a sense of our salary?
Go defense.
Ooh, okay.
Specifically, I don't have anybody in mind. I mean, I love the Niners, but they kind of killed me last week. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, my list right now is Niners, Eagles, and Cowboys, only because I think that I can get the salary to them, and the Niners are playing a practice squad quarterback, and the Eagles might be playing backups on the Giants. The Giants have literally nothing to play for. But the question is, and when the Bills had nothing to play for, when Brian Daboll was the offensive coordinator there, they would rest players in week 18. Brian Daboll is making it out like starters are going to play the whole game. He's been trying to instill this winning culture, so that's a possibility. I also think after the Damar Hamlin situation, which again, it's like players get injured in the NFL, and that was like that's something we've never seen before, but it would be that much harder in a head coach's head to justify playing guys like in a meaningless game, right?
Yep.
So I feel like the Giants are at a high probability of playing backups for a large chunk of this game. It would be great for the Eagles. Eagles are a good play regardless, but then if that happens, even better. And then Sam Howell is going to be starting for Washington. So great spot for the Cowboys in a game that they need to win as well. So yeah, I mean, I like any of those defenses. And then obviously we can pivot down cheaper. There's like the Texans are underpriced and some other defenses are underpriced that we could get some. The Jets are only 2,600, right? Like we can get some points down low, but I don't mind throwing in one of these expensive ones and then seeing what that leaves us with as we get deeper into this roster.
I mean, if we're trying to say salary, I don't mind going down, but like I've just been a little hesitant on a lot of things this week, to be honest, that being the defense as well. So
yeah, I mean, if we treat this like a fact-finding mission, then I would say let's throw in one of the expensive defenses because we know we can always pivot down.
right.
But if we start out with a cheaper defense and we have that extra salary, we're going to find a way to use it, and we're not going to end up on the more expensive defense. So I say let's start here and then kind of keep working through this roster, and then we get a sense of like what our salary looks like and where we might be able to kind of attack from that point forward.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. With that being said, let's do Cowboys and then,
What are your thoughts? Do you have any? Yeah, let's pick a tight end. And then I also want to know what your thoughts are on Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, like one of those, like pairing Justin Jefferson with one of these other guys who can also get us 30 plus.
That was what I was kind of leaning towards.
Cool.
So I love that. Tight end. I thought Kittle was kind of expensive this week. I looked at him. I thought he was a 6'1", but I guess he's just 6 flat.
And then Debo's back as well, though. So we got to keep that in mind.
Yep, exactly.
That Debo's going to be playing this week.
Debo's back.
So one of the things I like is, we often go to this tight end to get a sense of our salary, but then we also talked last week about the value of, which by the way, a great call in Conklin last week. He ended up in my player grid. He put up 14 points at only 2,900. One of the things we talked about last week was the high value of just like attaching a tight end to the game environment that you're placing. So we kind of want to think through also if at this point, right? Like, because you have Dallas Goedert has a high ceiling. You have Mark Andrews has a high ceiling if the Bengals are scoring a bunch of points. So last year, both of the Bengals games against the Ravens, they just kept their foot on the gas. One of the games, Joe Burrow had, I think it was 525 passing yards in a blowout win. And they just like kept passing the ball because it was a division opponent. They were almost like trying to assert authority in the division. They had a low scoring loss earlier this year against Baltimore. But if they come out and have another one of these big games against Baltimore, then Baltimore gets forced out of this run heavy mode. And Mark Andrews becomes a really attractive piece because we know what he can do when he gets targets. So I do think that we kind of want to, like, in addition to getting a sense of our salary, kind of also keep a macro sense in mind of like, are we potentially playing Goddard with Hurts? Are we potentially playing Burrow and Jamar Chase or T. Higgins with Mark Andrews? Or do we want to just kind of go tight end isolated from game environment bets. And then in that case, we can go to one of these cheaper guys like a Trey McBride or there was Albert Okwuegbunam. Greg Dulcich is out. The Broncos interim head coach talked about how he wants to see more of Okwuegbunam. He was on the field last week, similar to Dulcich, just super athletic guy who can make big plays down the field. He's only 2,900. I'm guessing he'll be popular this week, but he's another one of these guys where we could just say, hey, look, let's just save salary at tight end. Macro sense, are you where are you leaning right now from the quarterback standpoint? Because if we do play Burrow, I would want to get Mark Andrews on this roster if we're playing like Burrow Chase.
That was where I was actually leaning towards, was Burrow. So I'm totally fine with playing Mark Andrews. I do want to know because I kind of bid on this guy this week. What are your thoughts on Higbee?
Yeah, it's hard to know, right? Like he had 30 points 2 weeks ago. The Rams would ideally like to not pass the ball. I think Baker had like 19 pass attempts last week, and he's been kind of on this low pass attempt threshold recently. But one of the things that we talked about, I kind of started digging into it deeper into the week on the site, was one of the reasons I really liked Conklin was the Seahawks have been a top 3 defense against wide receivers, and nobody treats them that way. We talked about this deeper into the week last week. Like they've been as tough against wide receivers as the Jets, and they've been really bad against tight ends. And so everyone was on Garrett Wilson last week, and I was like, I would not touch Garrett Wilson. Xanamir sent me a potential Garrett Wilson prop bet for our prop subscription. I was like, I just don't want to touch wide receivers against Seattle. But I really liked Tyler Conklin, and he had one of his better games of the season. So I think Higbee's sharp. I think if I'm playing Burrow, I'm going to play Andrews instead. I think that with Higbee, you have the understanding that the Rams want to try to run the ball. Their preference would be to not throw the ball a lot. Their preference would be for Higbee to not have a big game, essentially. But there's a scenario where they're forced to pass, and then Higbee is the clearest guy who's going to benefit from that type of scenario.
Okay, awesome. I'm totally fine going with Andrews. He has that potential to get you a big game, and he's only 5'5". I mean, last year he was priced at the same price range as Kelsey like every single game. So
yeah, I mean, even as high as like 68, 7,200 last year. And if we're basically, this is like a way for us to say, if we play Burrow and Chase or Burrow and Higgins, we're now saying the Bengals are creating the type of game environment that leads to Andrews having the type of volume he had last year. And whenever he has a type of volume, he's pretty likely to blow up. And we look at this roster so far, like I think a lot of times in week 18, people get in the habit of thinking so much about who's the random guy who could hit that they like forget about trying to find guys who can win them a tournament, right? Like Justin Jefferson can single-handedly win us a tournament. Mark Andrews can single-handedly win us a tournament. If we get Burrow and one of his pass catchers in here, they can single-handedly win us a tournament. So all of a sudden we're starting from these guys who can legitimately win us a tournament, and then we'll move on to the next steps from there. I mean, Burrow is so underrated by DFS players. Like I think that every week this season, he's been under-owned relative to his general expectations. I mean, his last several games, right? 28 points, 25 points, 17, 30 points, 18, 31, 19, 15, 42, 35. Like this dude's a monster, and people just don't play him like that. 5 rushing touchdowns on the year. And again, this is the game that they need in order to lock up that AFC North and honestly have a shot. Well, it depends on what they end up deciding with the Bills-Bengals game. If they end up not playing it, if they end up canceling it completely, then I think that the AFC North becomes automatically locked up. But we're going to build this assuming that the AFC North is still in play here. And so, I'm actually wondering when we're going to get news on their plans for that Bills-Bengals game as well, because that makes a big difference in how all this shakes out.
Yeah, definitely. With that being said, I think both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are absolute beasts, and either one is a great pick. Sometimes I pair them, sometimes I don't. On this roster, if I was to build this roster and throw it out there for a couple tournaments, I would obviously have them paired up in one, maybe have one in the other, and just switch it up a bit. And we talk about that a lot. So
yeah. I mean, I think that you wouldn't be able to fit them both with Jefferson. So it'd be like in one you take Jefferson out, you play Chase and Higgins. In one you keep Jefferson and you play Chase. In one you keep Jefferson and play Higgins. Let's go ahead and throw Higgins in on this to save us a little bit of salary and see what flexibility we have from there.
Okay, awesome. We got about
3,500, and we're going to still need to play a running back. So, now we get down to who's kind of the random cheap wide receivers that we could end up playing and we still have this flexibility at defense too to go lower. At defense. So I think next up you go ahead and pick a running back, and I'm going to start scouting these cheaper wide receivers because we need a cheaper running back that can make all of this fit, and then we need a cheaper wide receiver. I actually have one thought already that's going to be something I'll be excited about.
All right, I think I am going to go with Zack Moss here, but I don't know why. I just love Zonovan Knight. When I watch him play, it was nice.
Yeah, and I mean Zonovan Knight is 8 and 6 carries last couple weeks with blowout losses. He's typically going to get more carries than like Zack Moss is guaranteed to. The problem with Zonovan Knight is he's playing this Miami defense that allows one of the lowest rush play rates in the NFL, one of the toughest defenses to run against. So teams tend to bias their attack toward the air against Miami because of how hard it is to run against them. And also one of the cheap wide receivers I like is going to be a Jets wide receiver. So let's go ahead and throw in Moss, and then we're gonna have to save some salary in defense, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm cool with going
Jets. We go down to who are you interested in among cheaper defenses? Texans is one that I like because they're going to be playing Sam Ehlinger, but basically we could go. They're also playing Zack Moss, right? So that's not necessarily the best way to play that. But yeah, what direction you want to go on these cheaper defenses?
I think Jets would be a great one to on this. Are you cool with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Position is already filled.
All right, that's going to get us just enough here. So we talked about this guy like 3 weeks ago. He didn't end up playing in that game, but Corey Davis is 3,500. And in healthy games this year, he has his last 3 healthy games, target counts of 6, 7, and 10 in a downfield perimeter role. And when he's healthy, he's playing, and Elijah Moore is sort of on and off the field. So everybody kind of thinks of Elijah Moore. They forget that Corey Davis is the guy who's actually out there. And again, 6, 7, and 10 targets in his last 3 games. The 10 target one was with Zach Wilson, so it was tougher for him to really ascend on that workload. And then same thing with the 7 target game was with Zach Wilson. Actually, the 10 target might have been with Mike White against Minnesota. And then against Seattle, he had 6 targets, but we've talked about how difficult of a matchup Seattle is, and most people don't see it that way. So Corey Davis, basically a lock for 6 targets, but could get as many as 8 or 9 targets, downfield role, can easily go for 100 yards and a touchdown at 3,500. I would price him at like 46, 4,700 given his role. So I really like this play and really like that we get it at low ownership. He kind of fits that veteran guy who could just end up having a blow-up game in week 18. And then we're so close to like Tyquan Thornton or to Kendrick Bourne or one of these guys with like a real role. So one of the things that we might want to think about doing is like saving an extra 100 at running. Like we could go Najee Harris down to like Miles Sanders or something like that. You know what I mean? And then we're kind of playing off of the fact that we don't have, from like a strategic standpoint, we're playing off of the fact that we don't have Jalen Hurts, we don't have AJ Brown. So we're betting on the Eagles still having a good game, but the touchdowns flowing through Miles Sanders. That's one of the clearest ways to do this. And then we can play like a Tyquan Thornton or a Nelson Aguilar who have a legit role and can have legit blow-up games. Or we could just kind of scour the bottom of this like 3,200 and below wide receiver pool, which is pretty thin. Maybe not the best way to go there.
Yeah. I have one thought. I mean, maybe it's not a good idea. There are other ways to go about it, but maybe like a double tight end here with 2 cheap tight ends would have been.
Yeah. We could go Okwuegbunam if we wanted to, exactly, and basically say like, if you say the scores we were targeting from Dulcich, which is like 8 to 10 points, but with 20-point potential, then yeah, we could actually do that. And then we end up buying ourselves an extra 600 in salary that we can use basically however we want. So yeah, I would just type in Albert and because otherwise you got to scroll below all the 3K guys.
Yeah, I was like, dang, it's taking forever.
And then we can put him in the flex on this. And now we've got, is that 600 left, 500 left that
It's
we
500,
can,
yeah.
that we can play around with. Basically at running back, we can go. We could even go. I mean, we've talked before about pairings with. We've talked before about pairings with like a Jets wideout and Zonovan Knight. We could go that direction, but again, it's a tough matchup against Miami. Or we could go from Zack Moss down to like a Khalil Herbert and then have even more salary. But I think probably the clearest way to do this is just go with the running back we were on before, which is Najee Harris. Because I don't think we sacrificed anything, or we have enough salary actually to get up to Kenneth Walker too.
Yeah.
So, which is a pretty sick way to go on this. Yeah, I actually really like that.
I totally agree. Yeah, that's what I was like looking at. And I was like, maybe you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, Kenneth Walker has like 7,500 upside, in terms of like the scores he can post, whereas Najee can't really post like a 35 pointer. So, 9 touchdowns on the year for Kenneth Walker. He has a game of 30, a game of 31. And then he's basically consistently in like the 15 plus point range. So, yeah, I actually like that. And again, betting on these teams that have something to play for is a great way to go. And I'm sure that we'll have a roster tomorrow or Saturday where we kind of get into like maybe 1 or 2 super random guys. But this kind of reminds me of the roster I had a few weeks ago that did really well, finished third in the Game Changer, where James Cook got me whatever it was, like 2.5 points. But because it was like, yeah, that's a bad score for what I paid for him at running back, but it opened up the salary for what I wanted to do at wide receiver. And so this is like, we're getting Zack Moss, who he could get a 20-pointer, but he also might end up with like 8 or 9 points, right? But if that allows us to get T. Higgins and Justin Jefferson and Joe Burrow and Mark Andrews, that kind of justifies, and Kenneth Walker, like all in the same roster, that kind of justifies itself. And if this is a week with thin 30-pointers, not a lot of 30-pointers on the slate, Burrow can score 30, Walker can score 30, Jefferson can score 30, Higgins can score 30, Andrews can score 30. That's 5 guys, and realistically, there might be 6 or 7 guys on the whole slate who score 30. On top of that, Corey Davis can score 20 to 25, and nobody's going to have him. And so, and Okwuegbunam, like I said, I think he'll be popular this week, but he can put up 15 to 20 points. And yeah, man, this is a pretty sick roster. We top to bottom, we've got upside. We're taking a little bit of sacrifice on Zack Moss, I think, but that allows us to pay up at wide receiver, which gives us a roster construction that other people won't have. Any final thoughts on this one?
No final thoughts on this one. I love the way we built this based on week.
Yeah, and again, thought exercise, right? Like last week we had a Jalen Hurts roster. He ended up not playing. And at the time, we weren't sure if he would. At this point, we could get news that Bills-Bengals is completely canceled. And then the Bengals have locked up the AFC North. And if that ends up happening, then maybe we don't expect Burrow and Higgins to play and we go a different direction. But this just like to talk through the strategies and how we put together a roster is obviously the most valuable component here. And then if Burrow's playing, if this is a game that they need to win, this is like a super sharp roster that I really like as well. So with that, we will get out of here. We will see you back here on Friday afternoon for edition number 2 of the DFS Lab. We will see you on 1 week season throughout the weekend, and we will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.